are again, and welcome back to this episode of Leading Through Unprecedented Times. I'm Tom Murray, your host, and I cannot be any more excited to introduce you today to the one and only Dr. Quintin Shepherd. Quintin is a superintendent in Pflugerville ISD in Texas. I had an incredible opportunity to meet him moments before I got to see him in front of a huge group of his community. And I stood back, and I will tell you, one of my very first thoughts was, number one, wow, he gets it. And number two, I need to steal him for the podcast because I need to get him in front of the Future Ready audience, share part of his story, some of the incredible work that he's leading, just to hear from an incredible superintendent in Texas, the work that they're leading down there, but also just a visionary leader, somebody who gets it. Quintin, my friend, it's good to see you again. How are you? How are things?
I'm great. I am great. As we get, so excited in the midst of the school year, it's just, you can't help but be more excited every single day. Things are good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, here we are in early 2025, and you've been at it for a long time. Talk to folks a little bit about your personal journey and education and how you got to where you are in Texas today.
Yeah, so it's been a long journey as a superintendent. Actually, it's about 19 years as a superintendent in 3 different states. Just the quick professional journey or even personal journey. I born and raised on a working farm in the Midwest, the last of the working farm generation of kids. We knew our way around livestock, and it was during the farm crisis, and so we struggled like every other family, but just fell in love with the idea of education as a career, and so I jumped into it. Found my first job as a pre-K through 12th grade music teacher, if you can believe that. Tiny little district in central Illinois. So I got to see the 3-year-olds and the 18-year-olds every single day, and what a great way to see kids at every level and see how much more responsible and emotionally stable pre-K kids can be than sometimes high school seniors. From there, had the opportunity to be an elementary principal for a short time, a high school principal for a short time, and landed my first superintendency also in central Illinois, a smaller district. Great job because you get to learn everything. I didn't have anyone who was, assistant sup for transportation or finance or personnel or HR. So you have to do it all and learn it all and what it takes to make a school district work. You're told in Illinois, if you're any good at your job, eventually you'll get recruited to Chicago. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I was recruited to the first district you would drive into as you left the city of Chicago heading northwest, which is Skokie. Urban district, 115 languages at the time, and a total change for me, just a paradigm shift about how we do leadership. And I'd been, superintendent now 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and was really struggling with how I define leadership and how it was handed down to me. And the way that I was expected to do leadership didn't really fit with what I believed leadership should be doing in the public sphere. And so I wrestled with that and tried stuff and engaged with my board. And we actually turned that district around. We were the 8th lowest performing district in the state of Illinois when I took over. And when I left, we had won the School Board Governance Award 2 times in a row. We were financially recognized, and the National School Board Association did a feature article on how we transformed a district. And so I knew I was on the right track because I was leading differently, and we were doing amazing things for kids and changing lives. And everybody says they want to change lives, but I had legitimate proof that it was actually happening. So from there, I was recruited to a very high performing school district in Iowa, where I served for a few years. And then shortly after Hurricane Harvey devastated the Gulf Coast, I was invited to come down and meet the folks in Victoria, Texas, where I just immediately fell in love. It was a rebuild community, and they needed, some bond work done and curriculum and overhaul and finances. I think we had about 30 days cash on hand as a district when I showed up. And so we turned that district around in 6, 7 years. And then recently I afforded the opportunity to come here to Pflugerville, which is just right outside of Austin. About a third of my district is Austin City proper, and the rest of my district is Pflugerville. And I'm just enjoying it in a way that's hard to put into words. I've now done 5 transitions, and with every one, I feel like I'm doing it slightly better. I've learned that there's I'll keep this brief, but I've learned that there's an art and a science to doing a transition well. Typically where we go wrong in a transition for any leader, so this is true for a principal, AP, superintendent, you name it, is that we come into the new system and our natural inclination is to map onto the new system using the previous system as our guide. And what happens if you do that is there will inevitably you will cause pockets of chaos and confusion and frustration. But you will also cause pockets of genius and creative brilliance. And so as I've studied that, I want to do less of the chaos and disorganization and more of the genius and brilliance. And so it's a matter of learning to map appropriately and at times inappropriately onto the system that you're evolving into, so that you can try to spark creative genius in places where it needs to happen and avoid the chaos and pandemonium in places where you don't.
Oh, I love that. And it forces us to think differently when we create some intersections that don't normally occur, normally happen. As you're talking there, number one, and congratulations on the receipts you have of turning some districts around, creating great opportunities, expanding opportunities for kids. Some of the pieces that I'd love to dive into with you, really. But number two, I'm thinking back to just watching you. We had just quickly met, watching you in front of your staff. And the first thing I'd love to talk about, in front of your community, part of your community, my very first interaction with you, you had brought together community members, you brought together students, there was teachers, there was admin, a true representation, business folks of your community. Talk to school and district leaders, because it's one thing that jumped out at me right away is your strength. And I say all the time that the best districts in the world only happen when we're intentional about it. Here you are as not a new superintendent, but newer to the district, being really intentional about using and building community, that community voice, that student voice, to help vision the district. Tell us a little bit about, from a school and district leader end, advice you have for new superintendents, new principals, about the importance around building community and community voice and all those pieces, because it's something that completely radiated out of everything I saw with you in front of your community.
I appreciate that you picked up on that. And that was one of, when I talked about my time in Skokie and evolving how I did leadership, that was one of a couple of the key principles that I happened on, is that, at that point in my career, we were still using words like engagement and buy-in. We're trying to engage our community in this conversation. We're trying to get some buy-in around these initiatives. And I have since abandoned and buried those words. I practically forbid other leaders from using those words whenever I get the opportunity, because what it presumes, there's an arrogant presumption built in there that I know the answer, and now I need you to get to buy into it. I need you to engage into my answer. And so what I'm really saying, if I want to put it harshly, I'm saying that I want you to subordinate your will to mine, because I have a privileged view of reality. Now, could I be any more offensive if I said that to you in person? But when I say, I've got this plan that I'm trying to put together, a strategic plan, and now I need some buy-in around it, that's essentially what I'm communicating to you. And so what I learned is that instead of engagement, which is after the decision has been made, what we really need is we need ownership, right? That's what I want. I want ownership around the strategic plan, so that I could say to a member of my community, I didn't write this, you did. These are your words. So what we did, even before that meeting where you came and visited with us, what we had done is we had done a digital crowdsourcing within our community. And I went out and I said, when I first started here, I said, what do you love about this community, and what do you think we should focus on? Then we had over 5,000 people log on to this crowdsourcing platform, and they had about 80,000 interactions, if you can believe that. And what we did is we crowdsourced the very best thoughts in our community, not the loudest voices, not just the people who can come to a Thursday night meeting at 7:00, but anybody who wanted to log on from their cell phone. They could be sitting in a Barca lounger after having worked a 12-hour day and say, these are the things I think you should focus on. And if it raised to the top of our list, then that comes into our strategic plan for this group to start talking about. So that same person who was sitting in that Barca lounger sees our strategic plan 6 months from now and says, I wrote that plan. I wrote that. Those are my words. I was a part of the creation of this document. So that's the ownership bit. The other thing that I think you picked up on in that room, and that is really important to me, and I talk a lot about this in my first book about leadership, is about how I choose to lead, which is I just use the word compassion. And if we break that word down, passion is to suffer, compassion is to suffer with. And so I'm a big fan of putting kids in a room with parents and community members and teachers in a room with kids and having everybody share their suffering. Because education is not perfect. Education has never been perfect in any district anyone has ever led. And so we want it to be great for everybody. Let's just talk about our suffering, and let's come together around suffering. Where are students suffering? Where are our staff suffering? And then let's come up with creative solutions to those ideas. And it's amazing how quickly people come together and have real, genuine, and authentic conversations if we're willing to do it compassionately.
Yeah, it was so fun to witness from the outside, just to see the honest conversation that students were having with business leaders in your community, with some of your board members, and just keeping it real. Hey, you're a school board member. Here's some things I need to tell you. And it was just that those intersections, the importance of that was just, it was fun to watch. But at the same time, what I walked away with was truly how intentional you were. This isn't here's the community, we want to just share something with you, give us your rubber stamp so then we can stand and say the community gave us involvement or the community gave us one bullet point. it's truly a community school, a community district, and that value was so apparent. And so on one hand, kudos to that. On the other hand, the intention with that, I was saying earlier, I'm trying to think of the old adage of who said it or where it came from, maybe a Native American proverb, but it's something along the lines of people are less likely to burn down something that they've built. And
That's
so
right.
when as communities, as we're helping to build that, right, the consensus behind that, the true buy-in, as you said. And I will say thank you also for challenging my own thinking and some of the language that we use there around engagement pieces. And I love your brilliance around that, and truly just made me rethink some of the ways that I've talked about that. But the intentionality there is awesome. Quintin, one of the things back in episode 4, we talked to Ken Shelton about was artificial intelligence. And as somebody that's very forward thinking in education, somebody that not only is a superintendent, but you get to speak some places and see some things across the country, artificial intelligence has been all the rave, right? And we see across the country, some places are, we're going to lock and block it. Don't ever use it. Can't ever, it's never going to be here. Other places, if we're all in and we jumped in head first, and oh boy, we might have to rethink some things over here. Talk to us a little about what you're seeing from an AI end, its implications from everything from like policy down to even in the classroom and use with kids, and so many possibilities, some boundaries that we probably need. What's your thoughts around that? What are you seeing around AI? How are you handling that as a district? Kind of your vision as a superintendent, and where you see all that going?
Yeah, I'm endlessly fascinated by all things AI, and I think I always try to keep in mind this is the worst version of AI that we're going to know, because moving forward it only gets better. It only gets better from here. And I fell in like 2 years ago at about this time when it was first released, and I think I spent my entire Christmas break just blown away at the potential in the tool and what it could become. I think you hit on something that's critical where a lot of district leaders have fallen short, which is we need to start with policy, because we got a bunch of teachers right now in classrooms around the country that are saying, I need a little bit of guidance here. When is it okay? When isn't it not okay? What's the district going to say is appropriate? What tools are appropriate and when? And I think as a district leader, part of our hesitancy is not in writing the policy. We know how to do that, and when the time comes, we're going to write it. And as a matter of fact, here in Pflugerville, as part of our strategic planning, we know that there's some forthcoming policy that's associated with AI. But where I'm struggling is I've not yet seen a product or a vendor on the market who is giving me the tool that I need, which is I don't need more AI tools. I mean, I'm sure they're coming, and yes, we'll need them as they come. But what we really need is we need some sort of an umbrella service of sorts that allows us, because there's some easy questions and then some harder questions. Like the easy question is, should we give first graders access to large language models and AI in the company? Like, yeah, probably not. Like, I think we're fine with that. Do you open it up for high school juniors and seniors? Okay, you just arbitrarily say, yes, sure, we'll open it up for that. What about a fifth grade student in a language arts classroom who's learning to craft a traditional 5-paragraph essay? Maybe not, because they need to learn to do it first. But maybe that same fifth grade student goes into a science classroom and they're having trouble understanding the content. Should we give them access to a large language model that could help as a tutor? Arguably, yes. And so what we need essentially, like, somebody needs to be in a control tower in the school district. This is in my mind. This is how it works. Somebody's in a control tower and says, yes here, yes in this classroom, no in these classrooms, or no in this grade, and sort of toggle on the AI capabilities, because to ask the teacher to do that unto themselves and every classroom to do it separately is a recipe for disorder and chaos, and kids won't get the same learning experience. And so that's where policy and procedure and the real world come together. And I think that's where there's so much opportunity from a leadership standpoint. I think the other place that I'm really fascinated about, and this is the subject of a forthcoming book, and for any of your listeners, this is an opportunity to get involved, because I have been endlessly plagued for, like, we'll say 6 to 9 months by one insidiously simple question. Just so simple, Tom. And if you want the question, I'll put it here, but I'm going to forewarn you, because once I seed this question in your brain, you're going to lose sleep tonight. Like, I'm sorry, it's just how it's going to go, because it's not easy to answer, and it's going to plague you for days as well. But the question that I've been wrestling, are you ready for it? Well, I should ask.
I have my pen. I'm ready to write.
So here's the question. What new being the operative word, what new cognitive abilities do human beings need in order to survive in a world of intelligent machines? The beauty of this question is we can't go to GPT to answer it because GPT doesn't know how to create new cognitive abilities. It's beyond the scope of what it's capable of doing. But what the reason this question is so important to me is because it's a teachable and learnable moment, not just for kids, but for teachers and for society, right? And I wrestled with this question for months and months. And truth be told, I've come up with 10, but of those 10, I think 8 are probably garbage. I think I've actually landed on 2 that like legitimately make sense. And so I'll give an example, and then I'll talk about why this is important. So one of them that I've landed on is offloading cognitive information, appropriate offloading of cognitive information. So think about like MapQuest or Google or whatever you use for your map software. Like prior to that, for those of us who are old enough to remember, we actually had maps and we kept like mental maps in our brains and we knew how to get from point A to B and we had wayfinding and all the rest of it. And that was how we grew up. And then came out these mapping software, and we cognitively offloaded everything. And now if you talk to parents about kids and this geospatial awareness, they will lament the fact the kids have no sense of geospatial awareness. They have no sense of wayfinding. And I'm like, oh, this is it. We offloaded too much. And so the question now becomes, what is appropriate cognitive offloading? And now I'm not actually talking about maps, and you've known this the whole time. What I'm talking about is the field of medicine. When is it appropriate for a doctor to cognitively offload some of the information, but maintain the principles that allow to guide for good medicine? What is appropriate cognitive offloading for an architect or an engineer? Or anybody in any field, in any industry. And I think this is a skill that human beings are going to have to learn in order to successfully live in a world of intelligent machines. And so I say all of that as a preamble to say this. This book is actually going to be a compendium of essays, if you will, roughly 2,000-word essays. And I'm inviting thought leaders or anybody who's super interested in AI to reach out to me, connect with me. We're going to take in as many essays as we can, and we're going to compile a book of these new cognitive abilities. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it helps steer the conversation in the right direction.
Oh, I love your viewpoint on that. And, I was thinking one of the first thoughts I had there as well is, you're right. I don't even know my mother's phone number anymore, right? I love my mom. That's not a knock on my mom, but somebody has to get her phone number, and I don't know, right? Because gone are those days. It's something that we, so a couple pieces to add to that. When I think about that, and I was also reliving sitting with my father as a teenager, outlining the map and highlighting on a map in one of those atlas things that we used to have of where I was going to go, and and how much of that absolutely has changed. And on one hand, there's this piece to learning really around cognitive struggle, right? The importance for the brain to have struggle in the learning, right? And so it was fascinating. I was listening to something the other day, and I believe it was OpenAI. One of the founders of like an OpenAI, some well-known CEO, said he had realized for some reason he didn't have access. He was trying to work somewhere and didn't have access. And his first thoughts were like, oh my gosh, I have to go into ChatGPT and he realized how reliant in just everyday work and tasks he had started to become. But it also gave him a pause of like, wait, there's parts to this that we've got to be careful of. And I think part of it is, and I use artificial intelligence every day, the generative AI, the generative side of AI, literally every day. But recognizing if we're not careful, we can take out our own creative thought. And then if we're using AI, we're essentially leveraging parts that are out there that we already know, meaning this. When I was thinking about that, I'll give you a personal example here as well, is, I have to have shoulder surgery coming up, and I went and I had my MRI, and how in the portal you get your results before you hear from your doctor, and that can be really good and it can be really bad, right? Like I get in there, I'm looking like, am I going to live? Is this all going to be okay? And I didn't understand any of the lingo. It was all medical terms, phrases. I just didn't really know what it meant. So I took it all and I copy and pasted it into generative AI and said, I'm a patient. I got these results on my right shoulder. I've been in pain. Help me understand these results as somebody that is not a doctor, and help me understand what they're probably going to say has to happen. And within seconds, it spits it all out. So I'm looking at it being like, all right, well, I'm going to live. That's the first thing that I know. Good thing. Number two, it gave some insight. And so it really intrigued me. And so when I went to the doctor, I went to the shoulder surgeon, I said, hey, before you tell me about my MRI and what's wrong, can I tell you what I think you're going to say? And I had a bit of a relationship with the person. So they looked at me like, okay, sure. And I pull out my phone. I said, I think you're going to say that this, and this. And I've got 3 options, this, and kind of looked at me like, where'd you get that from? And so I explained, and I said, well, I looked it up, and I said, am I right? And he's like, well, by the book, yes, technically that's right. I said, push back on the problem. Put my educator side. Why is that an issue, what I just did? And he said, well, a couple things. Number one, what if it was this conversation was you had very severe cancer and I'm going to be looking at you telling you that you had a month to live. And there you were sitting in a parking lot by yourself trying to decipher that information.
Wow.
Right? The human side. And then he said, here's the other thing is that in the example that you just gave, technically for your shoulder, yes, it's right. Technically, those are your options. But what it didn't know is, and I don't have, he said, this is the example. I'm not diabetic personally, but let's say somebody was also diabetic and then it would change what the outcome might be because of other existing pieces to it. He said, it wouldn't consider things it didn't know. Like as a doctor,
Right.
we can look at everything. Now you could give it access to your full health care. And yes, that's going to probably be pieces to it. But what it really relayed to me was the importance of the human connection, not abdicating all of our decisions, and the importance of the human side of making sure and stepping back. Does this make sense? Is this right? And we can't fully abdicate those things, especially when we're talking about children and their futures there as well. So sorry to get off on that tangent.
It's well stated.
Important aspect. Really appreciated your thoughts on that. Another thing that I want to dive into here at All for Ed and at Future Ready Schools, we've been doing some work around pathways, and I know it's something that you're passionate about. Really redesigning the experience. I think any study that you look at when you look at like engagement rates in classrooms at our high school levels, every study that's been done shows, the longer that we have kids, the less engaged they become in our system, right? And that's got to change. And so when we look at some of the great work that's happening around the country with pathways, giving kids skills before they leave, kids graduating sometimes with associate degrees before they even leave high school, and all these different pieces, there's so much work that can be done. There's so many things that districts are doing. Some states have some pretty significant red tape that we're trying to work through. Talk to us about your vision on whether it's redesigning the schooling experience or looking at pathways. And you've been really a thought leader in that area. So tell us some of the things that you're thinking about right now.
Yeah, I think you hit it. And again, you said that magic word engagement. And I think that's part of the problem. We actually don't want the kids to be engaged in their schoolwork, right? Or their pathway. We want them to own it, truly. And I don't say that lightly. I just think that it's huge. It's a mind shift for us about what does it mean for a student to own their pathway. One of the other core principles or guiding principles for me is, on graduation day when they walk across the stage, yes, we care and we celebrate and that's awesome. But I'm actually far more interested on the Monday following. And that I want every single graduation should not be a goal for us in public education in this day and age. Like that's the floor, that's the expectation. Goals are things that sometimes you don't meet, right? But like for me, I think that every single child, 100% of our students, regardless of where they are academically or what they're interested in, should have either one of the 3 E's. We all talk about this, right? Employment, enlistment, or enrollment. They should have industry-based certifications that allow for them to get a high-paying job on Monday morning, right? Enlistment in a military acceptance letter that they know that they're going, or enrollment into college or university, right? And so if we're serious about that every child is going to graduate with one of those 3 E's, then we kind of have to back our way into the system itself and say, does our system currently designed or structured in such a way that insists that every child, not allows for, but insists that every child can make this a reality? And the truth is, in most places, the answer is no. And I think part of the reason the answer is no is we've got to get meta for just a minute, and we have to talk about elementary, middle, and high school. Because when I say elementary school to you or to anybody else of our vintage, shall I say, we have a certain image in our head of what elementary school should look like, and we have the desks in our mind and the teachers and the principals and the library and so on and so forth. Say middle school and I say high school, it's the same thing. And so it's almost to where we started at the beginning. We're mapping something we experienced onto a current iteration of a system that is not appropriate. And so in my mind, whenever I try not to use the words elementary, middle, and high school, believe it or not, as a school district superintendent, those words, because they just conjure up too much meaning that we can't disabuse ourselves of. Instead, I prefer to talk about it this way. Elementary school is all about exposure. Let's just call that the exposure experience, right? The exposure. We're exposing you to new ways of learning. We're exposing you to ways that you understand the world. We're exposing you to new content and new knowledge and new people and new ways of being in the world. Expose, 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 right? Middle school is all about experience. This is where we should be giving, in truth, in a perfect system, this is where we would be giving kids job embedded learning experiences and shadows and internships and we would modify it, of course, for that age group to make it appropriate. But they need to experience things like blended learning, because maybe I love that or maybe I hate it. And they need to experience some version of virtual learning and what that looks like, because some kids are going to love it, some are going to hate it. Right. And so it's all about experience, because high school is gone. That concept is a woebegone concept that does not apply to the education system as it currently stands. I think that high school is all about pursuit. We need to get our kids on a pursuit pathway. At this point, I know I am college bound. That's where I'm feeling drawn to. Okay, great. We have some pathways for you. Are you more interested in an AP pathway? Are you more interested in a dual credit pathway? Do you want to go P-Tech pathway? Do you want to go early college, high school pathway? What are you thinking? Great. Where's your interest at? How does your brain know the world? Oh, I'm a concrete sequential. Fantastic. I'm not talking to you about jobs now. I'm talking about how your brain interprets the world, and I've got a pathway for you, so I can kind of help you find your success, find your route, so that you can own it. But in those schools that have done this type of work in some version, they've done a great job. But where I think the next iteration for us, the next big step for us, is we've got to build on ramps and off ramps from these various pathways. Because some kids will get on a pathway, they'll get on a ramp, and they'll say, turns out that I'm not as much in love with this as I thought I was. Great, we've got an off-ramp for you. And then we've got another on-ramp into a different pathway. And so it becomes all about gateways and pathways and gateways and pathways and gateways and pathways. And if we design our systems that way, around pursuit pathways for kids, then we can have a serious conversation about 100% of our kids graduating with their high school diploma and employment, enlistment, enrollment.
Love that. Absolutely love that. And I love the 3 E's piece there too. I've heard that before, and I think it's just such a way to do it. And I love your call to action of, this isn't a nice to have. This is what we need to be setting kids up for their world that is so rapidly changing. So listen, we do need to start to wrap up here because of time, and I'm conscious of your time as a superintendent. I do want to give a shout out though for all of our listeners that have been listening to you share your brilliance. You've got your last book, your second book was Transforming Education, and then you've got one coming out. You mentioned that a little bit. If folks are interested in connecting with you or either of your books, where can they get that information?
Yeah, the books are all online. You can find those easy. Just Google search and it comes up. Quintin Shepherd. It's all there. The way to contact me, the only I don't know, even I think it's social media. The only place where I exist is in LinkedIn. You can find me pretty easily on LinkedIn. Just type in the name. I'm happy to connect with folks there. And of course, you can find me through the district website as well. Pretty straightforward.
Awesome. So, Quintin, one question I love to ask, just to wrap it all up here for all of our guests. We've got listeners all across the board, superintendents, principals, lead teachers, no matter what state they're in, no matter what position they hold, no matter how many years of service they have. What's one piece of advice you have for educators right now from your heart in this moment that you think they need to hear?
A phrase that has just been ringing in my heart, I like how you say that, and in my head, is for those leaders who are feeling really confident in where you are and settled in where you are, I'm speaking to you. For those leaders who are feeling really challenged right now, I'm speaking to you. For those teachers who are feeling uncertain and unsettled, I'm speaking to you. So I'm speaking to everyone directly when I say this, that comfort and growth cannot coexist in the same space. So if you're comfortable right now, my charge to you is you might not be growing. And if you're not comfortable right now, this is good news because it means you're growing.
Absolute brilliance, my friend. I'm so glad that we connected. It is such a privilege and honor to learn from you, to watch your leadership, to learn from your leadership. Keep leading the way down there in Texas. That's Dr. Quintin Shepherd, everyone. Quintin, my friend, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.